Good evening. You're listening live to the Xtreme Movie Show. I'm your host, Rob Logsamy tonight, broadcasting to you from the Pine Hills Palace, just west of Orlando, Florida. Ian-ridden, hurricane-proof castle, as it were, here as we got through the storm. A-OK. I've got Professor Pixel with me, a.k.a. Pixel Loomis, and of course, we're covering tonight's movie, 1987, John Carpenter, Prince of Darkness. What many would say is the second in his trilogy of the apocalypse, as it were, because as you know, Pixel, whenever you make three movies and you want to give them all a little extra rub, you just claim that they're part of some trilogy. In this case, we got to go back to the whole early to mid 80s when things weren't really thinking about the change of the next decade, unless you're, of course, a fan of Prince's song 1999, because this has apocalyptic doomsday themes. It's got religious priests. It's got goo, it's got Satan and differential equations. This is a conceptually highbrow type movie, and the scariest thing about it is actually the set design, the pieces, and really everything else about it, because really the big criticism for this flick is that it kind of doesn't really go to the promised land, give you the Prince of Darkness per se, which I don't really have much of a problem with, but I can understand why people feel a little let down. And despite Alice Cooper and other sorts of neat stuff in here and some incredible music, it basically is Assault on Precinct 13, aka any sort of Western that John Carpenter ever liked here. But overall, I would say Prince of Darkness has got, you know, a slow, deliberate makeup. The setup is fantastic. Some great shots of LA, even though it's not a Dean Cundey type film. But it's enjoyable. It's likable. It's not hardcore graphic or anything like that at all. But it's a very Carpenter-esque film, obviously. So
Yeah,
it's not bad. And this is a first watch for you, correct? What's your initial take?
yeah. I'm actually surprised. I really liked it. We talked about, I think it was last year, The Fog, to go ahead and cover
Yes.
some horror. And it feels like a John Carpenter film in that way. The Fog and this, they have very similar makeup, and I think that it really just kind of shines through here. I loved the sets. The sets were amazing. The idea behind it, definitely interesting. And I think the performances were all solid. So I think I know that it's a very unpopular opinion, but I'm not a fan of The Thing. I prefer this to The Thing.
It's interesting you see that because, like a lot of films, Carpenter's, even though this one was shot in 30 days and a really modest budget or whatever, because Carpenter had a new deal with agency he was with. He had a 3-picture deal. It just goes to show how low budget movie, if somebody's got a vision, can put something together. And when you talk about The Thing, it's hard in a way because like E.T. outshoned it, and I think E.T.'s not. It might be done well in terms of a movie production, but I could care less for the film. And The Thing is supposed to be kind of cynical and all that. Carpenter has a lot of that in his films, and he definitely has it here in this one as well. But you're right. I think it's an unpopular opinion because if anything else, the money printing machines and laundering machines are going off here at the Pine Hills Palace for those of you hearing all this stuff. But it's I like the end of the world kind of cynical ending of The Thing, and this one kind of sort of has it too, but it's not as paranoid feeling. I think it just gives you that feeling of, oh my God, something cosmic can happen, and that's what's different than The Thing. The Thing feels a little more isolation paranoia type.
Yeah.
And so while they both have cynical endings, I think the way you get there is a little bit different. And you're not the only one to sit there and say, well, the thing's kind of stupid and it's kind of boring. Nothing really happens. And I disagree. And we'll cover that in another film. But for me, this is a decent film. It's probably middle of the pack for as far as what I enjoy and all that too, but certainly recognizable as Donald Pleasance, who helps carry the film, I think, too. And I think the cast, as broad as it was, they did a pretty decent job, and I agree with you. The sets were fantastic. A lot of them are in areas that when you go online and you look at where are they now, and you look at the films where they were shot at, it's pretty cool looking. And the whole idea here with this film is that the Brotherhood of the Sleep, a rogue, if you will, Catholic, because Catholics cornered the market when it comes to this sort of horror stuff, The Exorcist and this. I mean, no other ones come close. The idea is that they've kept a secret from the rest of the Vatican and the rest of the world, and that is that Jesus himself is not actually the Son of God. He's an extraterrestrial being who came here to Earth, and he's kind of like warning everybody about this other being who we'll deem as being Satan, and allegedly over the years you can keep the secret from everybody, but now evil is brewing again. And the way you know that is because of some interesting things, which we'll talk about, because the movie itself, it deals with a lot of physics and science. So I don't want to call this science fiction, but we're going to have to explain some of that to explain what's actually happening in
Yeah.
here. So before we dive into the details, which, that would be my specialty when it comes to this type of film and the subject matter here, I said that this is your first watch for it, and you said you kind of liked it here. Why don't you start us off talking a little bit about how we get drawn in and what the setup is like and why you think it's good right off the bat?
I mean, in the typical John Carpenter fashion, the man, while he makes some very iconic music, he also has the longest introductions because there are many shots in between the names that he has listed at the beginning of this film. But it moves along very quickly. We get this professor, as he's explaining to his students, oh, well, what do you know about reality? What if reality is beyond what we could think? While we also see Donald Pleasance dealing with the death of another father, the one who was the last keeping the secret of the sleep, from what I gathered. And in that journal, that's where he learns his secret. He goes, he sees it for himself, and he needs answers because everything is unraveling at that point. Like there's definitely something going on here that's even further, and he can almost feel it. So he goes ahead, he calls upon professors, anybody that he can to come in to study this giant vat of slime.
It's a good-looking vat of slime. I have to say that.
Yeah.
It's a cheap budget, but it looks great, doesn't it?
It does. Yeah, I mean, with the swirling, it was compared to a frog in a blender, but
Kermit sauce.
oh no! Ah! Yeah, but no, it goes ahead and it's a slow setup. You're right, but I think that is a part of the just drawing us in. When we learned that the lock for it, because it can't be opened from the outside, that there's a lock within, that goes ahead and gets you wondering, okay, something's got to be in here. And things just seem to fall into place. So if you want to go into the sciencey YMC side of things, go ahead.
And that I shall. Yeah, so again, we see Donald Pleasance and this whole, not conspiracy, but the secret and all that. That's kind of cool stuff. And the initial shots here on the university are SoCal, Southern California. That's where he went, Carpenter, to study film, and that's where in the late '60s, early '70s, you had like this new generation of people like him that actually went, and a few others that are names that were considered A-level guys. And Carpenter, to me, talent-wise, is certainly A-level, but he didn't have the renown in the '80s like these other guys did, and that's its own thing. But they're filmed there. So one thing I have to say is that I've always said that whether you care about the characters or not, having the story revolve around them for the most part is typically what you're going to want to do, because if you don't care, everything else doesn't seem to matter for the most part in most films. And so Carpenter, to your point, does do a lot as far as setting it up, but you have the people looking at each other. You've got a guy, the blonde dude who's from Simon and Simon, which is a detective show in the mid 80s, like we've talked about with T.J. Hooker, Spencer for Hire, My Vice, and all these other ones, Remington Steele. That was another popular one as well. And I'm like, oh, it's that guy. And so this has a very mid to late 80s look to it, the way people are dressing. And it's, of course, shot on the streets of LA. So Carpenter does, I think, a very good job here, making you feel like you're either on the campus grounds of USC or in the church or whatever. And of course, there's some really beautiful shots of some settings going on in the classroom, too. And the whole science part to it is this. There's an old expression when you talk about science, it's called classical mechanics, and classical just means old. And means what everybody knows. If you know anything about basic science at all, when you graph stuff and you can come up with equations that supposedly represent how things going on, but you have certain things that are assumptions that you have to have with it for that to work. Not whether it's certain numbering systems or constraints or all these fancy terms. But the idea is that when you get very, very small, like with atoms and stuff that makes things up, those classical rules break down. And so what they're saying here, and he actually does a good job, I think, Carpenter, of integrating some of this talky stuff, because it's stuff you'll need to know for later, is he talks about how when you get into quantum mechanics, which has only been around for 100 years, that the new modern physics, as they call it, that would be the name of the class you'd be in, that those rules break down and turn into other things. And so there's concepts out there that use them to kind of explain stuff, and it affects you philosophically. Like, for example, um, when Simon and Simon and the chick are walking around, the one he's trying to bed, and seems to do so just by asking her for a cup of coffee. They're having a conversation, theoretical versus applied. Applied is like engineering, and he's a theoretical physicist, and are talking about what's called Schrodinger's cat, which is the idea that there's a cat in a box. The box has a lid on it. Before you open it up, is the cat alive or dead? And the whole answer is there's no right or wrong answer, because you don't know until the event has occurred. And that is when you open it up. So you can argue in terms of percentages about stuff, and the mere act of observing something changes it. So when you get on a very small level, the light particles that bounce off of something and to come into your eye actually have momentum because they're moving, and so they actually displace something, and you go, oh, that's stupid, that's dumb. Well, that's actually what's happening, but we don't think in terms like that, so it doesn't make sense. So the whole idea here, we're explaining these things and setting it up, is we're being introduced to not just physicists, but other scientists, because there's going to be a wide variety of them in here that are going to help crack this secret code, allegedly, of this book that's written in different languages with numbers mixed in that turn out to be differential equations. And like the one Asian guy says, wait a minute, if this book's 2,000 years old, differential equations have only been around for hundreds of years. And so there's this whole bigger than humankind end of the world feel to it, and having Alice Cooper helps. And the last really big thing here too that they talk about with time is super important, and it's hard to do this in the movie, and that should be the end of it, is you have certain particles that are very, very small that supposedly travel faster than the speed of light. And the speed of light is the fastest anything can travel, allegedly, because if you go faster than that, you're not traveling, you're reappearing somewhere else. And that's the idea of teleportation on a very small level. Can it happen or not? So the idea in here is that eventually we learn that the Brotherhood of Sleep, all these Catholic priests keeping this secret evil force as Kermit goo together, they communicate by sharing dreams. And the dreams they're receiving are from the future because of these particles. And what do we see? We see perhaps the best grainy Blair Witch type footage of all time that they start seeing, because that's one creepy ass scene that they replay over and over. And damn it, he milks it to great effect, right?
Yeah.
So the whole thing is they don't go overboard with the science, because this happens in several of the conversations. And while I've bored and chased off the 4 or 5 listeners we have with the science talk, it's pertinent to the movie, because that's the whole essence of here. How do you take good and evil in terms of religious tones, take the religion part out of it, other than it being a front, and make it apply in modern day world? Well, you tie it into what? Apocalyptic stuff. You throw Alice Cooper in there. You throw in mind control and visions from the future and weird stuff, and it's not quite Lovecraftian, but that's the whole tone this movie has, and it does a great job of building it up and explaining all of it. But like I said, it breaks down like an assault on Precinct 13, and that's not a horrible thing. But that takes us to where we meet everybody together at the church with people watching them. And don't forget this. We know that there's apocalyptic stuff going on, because it's probably the best matte painting we've ever seen of the near eclipse taking place. And also ants crawling over people's faces, and worms,
Yeah.
and all sorts of stuff, right? Stuff goes bad in nature. So we're getting those too. So take us through a little bit of this middle part here, where they're all getting together and they're all trying to figure out what's going on. What stuck out to you?
I just want to say, did you know that Alice Cooper was actually in talks to be one of the students that attend, within, to have a more major role in the film? Did you know that?
Yeah, and Alice Cooper,
Yeah.
just as an aside here, he used one of his devices from his famous shows from the 70s to impale the one dude later in the
Yes.
film, which is
But
kind of cool. So I think he was a really good sport.
yeah,
He's a big golf guy, and he's pretty much a hardcore Christian that a lot of people don't believe, or at least he
he
claims to
is.
be. And he's a big time golfer. But the thing with Alice Cooper is I've known a few people personally that have met him backstage or in other functions, business wise. They've said he's a really a pleasant individual. And obviously it's a shock thing like Kiss and other stuff, glam stuff like David Bowie from the 70s, moving the 80s. But Alice reinvented himself in the 80s, and in 86, 87, when he came out with the album that had Poison on it, I'm telling you, that thing was huge. It was massive. So it's like he found a second leg of his career, and being in here certainly helped him too. But yeah, Alice Cooper, it's nice that he did what job he had to do. He did well, and that's good, because if he didn't, it would have sucked.
I was going to say, like I said, they wanted him to be inside, but he said that he didn't need no education. So
that's not funny.
Very funny. You just cut my joke off. Oh, okay. But seriously, yeah, no. Towards the middle here, it's when everything starts coming together. What's the name of the poor girl? Oh my gosh, I can't remember. You know the one. The one with the glasses, as they keep calling her. The poor
Where's
girl.
your notes, sir? I know you write them down.
I didn't write notes for this actually, because I knew we were, because this isn't like James Bond where we're going like scene by scene. We're taking it a little more like our other stream. So with that in mind, no, I don't have notes, but I will go ahead and say that she does a fantastic job of looking possessed. I mean, she has the same dead stare throughout the rest of the movie afterwards. But yeah, no, with it slowly picking people off one by one. The only weird one was when they get to, I believe her name was Anne. She's the second person to become possessed. The second woman, and then the black guy, I can't remember his name either, but he gets possessed as well, but they go ahead and have him full on make out to possess him. It was a little weird.
That was mildly sexual there, right?
No, it wasn't mildly. It was full on. But only for that guy. Everybody else, no, just shoot water out of your throat. But no, not for him.
Susan is the one you're thinking of, the first one.
Yes, Susan, the one with glasses. She is taken. The rest of them fall, and it seems rather desperate towards the end. There's this one girl, sadly, that Kelly, who gets marked early on, and it's a bruise, and it's almost the shape of a cross at first, but it slowly reveals itself to be something else. And she becomes kind of pregnant, but then the pregnancy takes her over throughout the last part of this
She's
movie.
a vessel for the evil force.
Yeah. Father. Yeah. No, poor girl. She just wanted a nap. But no, the goo, I think they do a really good job of going ahead and taking each of the characters as they are taken over and ultimately working for the anti-god or the anti-god's son. With that in mind, each of them have this distinct kind of personality with each of them. The poor black guy who gets he did get made out with before he made but he goes ahead, he has this laugh, like this really kind of sad laugh. He stabs himself in the throat halfway through to basically just show the rest, hey, look at what I can do. And he only gets distracted later on by looking at himself in the mirror. And that's when he kind of breaks and starts to cry in between his laughter. But there's the guy that breaks his neck. He goes ahead. He has a slow way of going about it. And poor sobbing, kind of like a gym coach. Can't remember his name either, but I liked him a lot. I think I liked him more than the real professor. He's got a sobbing kind of face. It's these pure base emotions all working towards the same goal, to ultimately find a vessel for Satan and to bring Satan's father into the real world, out of the darkness, the anti-God. And with that, we do get some survivors. That's what really surprises me the most. Because when I heard that this was kind of connected, but not really, with The Thing and In the Mouth of Madness, it seems like, okay, everybody's going to just at the end here. But no, I'm surprised they go ahead and make sure to leave it open. So that way it's, you're wondering when you go home, is the dream done? Is the anti-God defeated? Or is the now finished dream that we get to see what comes to pass?
Well, I want to touch on something you just brought up because I
Sure.
think it's pertinent, and that's the fact that we've got about a dozen characters in here that aren't really major characters, but they're on the screen long enough where you associate them with their function. Oh, this is the Asian who's the old world scripture, old languages expert who's deciphering some of the book. You've got the mathematician that's working on the numbers that are coded in the book. You've got the biochemist, which would be different from a different type of chemist that's in there. You got the one that does the carbon dating, and she's briefly in there. You get somebody who is a computer guy. You've got a few people that try to leave and then they get killed and taken over in graphic scenes. The other, we mentioned ants. There's beetles and stuff too, but there's a type of sub horror that we haven't really gone into too much. I've talked a lot about this at length, where David Cronenberg's made a career out of body horror. That there's something base level and primal about things going wrong with your body. And of course, he was known for redoing The Fly in the mid 80s with Jeff Goldblum, but he's done a lot of stuff there too. I think it was Shivers in one of his earlier films in the early mid 70s, when they're at a really upscale condo complex up in like Toronto or Montreal or whatever, and then everybody kind of gets infected. So it's just kind of disgusting and gross. And there's an element of that in here too, like with The Thing, because that's something that we all can instinctively, I think, feel. When we talk about cosmic horror and all that, that's not really scary because we can't really picture it. So I think it was sort of smart in a way to kind of have this hive mind mentality take over. And you're right, you don't know which people survive. It does mean we only end up with a potential few survivors. But it turns out that where things start getting creepy, once they start happening, then you have a really quick third ending and third act to it, of the ending of the movie, where we know that what's going on there at pretty much the same rate that the characters do. It's not like we're way ahead of them. So we're seeing how they deal with it. And I know some people complain about how, well, it just turns into a dumb movie, and that people just kind of go off by themselves looking around at stuff, as opposed to like working together in a group. And that's easy to say, but really, if you're in grad school and you're working on stuff, you've got a strong ego. You're looking to make your mark. I liked how people were presented as young to not quite middle-aged adults working on something and treating the science part of it serious without being a complete nerd. And it didn't matter. Each person got a little bit of an area of expertise to say one or two lines as they were talking to each other. And that felt good. It felt organic. And I especially liked the one scene of the one lady that was talking to the Asian guy that was, he was obviously in Carpenter's movie earlier that year, to the karate one, Big Trouble in Little China. Several of them were. But she's
Young
saying,
one?
hey, yeah. She goes, hey, look at these people standing out there. They've been watching all that. She goes, I know schizophrenia a little bit. And she talks about how they have like these broken patterns in her head that they do like every 20, 30 minutes. They, utter a phrase, or they do something physically or mechanically repeatable, because that's just how their brain is firing or misfiring. She goes, they haven't been doing that. So it was nice that even though she wasn't going to be a main character, she got enough chance to kind of shine in her specialty by adding a little factoid that was pertinent to the development of what was going to happen. And it ups the ante of the fear, because we know this crowd outside is getting bigger. They're surrounding
Yeah.
the building. They're starting to take people out. But yet you have somebody that's a scientist in their own right, even though it's not what we would call a hard science like physics or chemistry, let's say. It was a soft science. But that's okay. They're all treated somewhat equally there. Nobody's really getting shit on for being in a lesser science, so to speak. I thought that was kind of cool and done in a mature way or whatever. Because at the end, it gets super trippy. They all start having the same dream, and they all are getting this vision from the future. And it turns out that the lady sort of kind of getting possessed with the vessel of this anti quote unquote God particle sort of bit, that which people in society have called Satan in this film, that it's trying to escape, and it becomes a little bit of a chase thing at the end and all that. But the cool thing, even though it's super cheap, was the dream sequences where it's almost like a lady's compact. Basically, the force is inside it, and so when it's possessing the body, it's trying to pull it out of the mirror, but the mirror's too small, so they go for a bigger one. And then the redhead squeeze that the Simon bedded with coffee. It's like right out of Ron Burgundy. Hello to you. Here's a cup of coffee. Don't tell me you love me. She basically is what she's saying. She recognizes what's going on, and this ties into with a really cool scene with Donald Pleasance finds an axe, a fire axe, and he beheads the body that's out, trying to pull in the from the other side, literally chops the head off, and then the body picks up the head, puts it back on itself, and adjusts it. I thought that was cool. But redhead woman pushes the body and herself through the mirror to the other side, and then Pleasance, the priest, takes the axe, destroys the mirror, allegedly closing the vessel to the other side. I mean, it's literal, it's whatever you want to call it, and it's kind of cheesy, but
it's what I was screaming.
It works.
Whenever it was getting to that point, and he was just hacking away at her with his axe, I was like, no, just push her through. She can reach inside, push through, break the mirror. It's your only chance. Because I didn't know what other option there could be, and you couldn't just make one up at the end. Oh well, we can go ahead and believe. No, you have to work within the physical boundaries that you've gone ahead and set. So if they can reach into the mirror for the anti-god, then the only logical thing is to push the son of the anti-god into the realm of darkness as well. It absolutely, it makes sense for us. And that's what I was saying, but Donald Pleasance wasn't listening, and then he gets crushed somewhat, not to fatality, but crushed behind a dresser. And that's when the redhead comes in. She saves the day, but, Donald Pleasance has to throw the axe to break the mirror.
Let me ask you this about her. We see her in one of the first scenes of the movie as the credits roll in. We're being visually introduced to the characters, and we see Simon. I call him Simon from Simon to Simon. He's watching her, and she's obviously hooked up with a guy that looks like pre-shooter McGavin with a semi-mullet walking around. So it's like, okay, he's got his eye on this woman, and they start talking or whatever. And sure, of course, she sleeps with him like after nothing. But when they had a conversation, she's like, "Oh, that's a very sexist comment to say," because he's like, "Well, what's a pretty girl like you doing in a place like this?" And he's like, "Hey, sorry," and they're talking or whatever, and he kind of charms her out of it or whatever. It just felt like she had issues. So at first I thought, oh, she's kind of annoying, and why is she the love interest? But now it makes sense. She's kind of like the strong female heroic figure in a way that just feels doomed or whatever. I mean, in a really dumbed down 80s way, we'd say she's got daddy issues, but she knows that she's meant for something bigger and in her own way. So she sacrifices herself at the end going through all this. So at first I kind of didn't get that, but well, she didn't want the guy to tell her, that she loved him, because he's like, "Hey, can I tell you something?" She's like, "I don't want to hear it, but maybe after the second time." And I'm like, this is 80s dialogue at its finest. I just needed some saxophone playing, and then it was going to go in the erotic zone, but that's a different kind of film. Huh?
But I mean, with her going ahead and trying to push her through, it was a desperate play. But
I agree.
Even
but I think,
what we get to see,
I think we were shown this early on of her, that she had the mental makeup to be that way. Just like Simon was kind of like the guy everyone just seemed to naturally assume was the leader, because they went to him for stuff and he kind of like guided people and stuff. So I think their true roles came out. They're both leaders in their own way.
Yeah, no, she's definitely got a presence at the she is the last girl standing, but ultimately she didn't want to be put in the realm of darkness. And so the thought after that, where we get to see the full dream, and it seems that Satan himself has taken over her form, and that's where we're left with potentially this is the real dream, this is the end, and this could be what is coming. That's they basically made it happen. Even though you have the professor saying it had to happen this way, that way we could stop it. We've stopped it. Even though that was close to Loomis, but yes. With that in mind, it's just it goes ahead. They went ahead and almost doomed themselves, but we'll never really know, and that's what you're left wondering at the end.
Yeah, he's a bit beside himself because this one night stand, potential multiple night stand, who knows where it's going to go kind of situation is now no longer in his life, literally. So he wakes up in bed, kind of having the same dream and freaks out. Then he kind of wakes up again and he sees the big mirror and he goes forward like he's going to touch it. And then that's when the movie ends. And I don't know how you end a movie like that. Just like I mean, I'm not a movie guy, right? Obviously, I just talk about him. So I'm going, how would I show Satan? And the whole point is it's about the Prince of Darkness. That means you're gonna not. That doesn't mean you're gonna see him. But I know some people are like, well, damn it, if you're gonna advertise it and build up for it, you gotta show him. And I
No,
disagree.
no,
It's about the reimaging of what good and evil is, flip side of the coins, and how do we look at that in science? A positive particle and the negative particle, and
I've got to go ahead and I've got to disagree. I think if we're talking about the Prince of Darkness here, the prince, as it were, is not the anti-god. The anti-god's in the other realm. No, the prince is the son, the one that we actually get to see take over. I can't remember her name's Beth, something like that. Uh, Poor girl, doesn't last long. But yeah, no, that's our prince. That's our main antagonist, and their goal. We're watching their goal to bring their father into the physical plane. Yeah, so the Prince of Darkness is heavily throughout this movie, and we do get to see a hand. That's what we get to see, and you get to see it's all
that's
red.
true. It's
You see the
teased.
claw. Yeah, it's teased. But yeah, you have to let people's imaginations be there. Verity is right. Um, so yeah, no, you go ahead and just tease us like that and leave it at the end. And it's definitely not like the other girl was left. In the dream, she's in her full redhead form, hair touched by fire. Yeah, no, it's definitely thought provoking, and I really like it. The more that you talk about it, it's just there's a lot to this movie to like, and I wasn't sure how I'd feel. I read a little bit about it, but I didn't know exactly how I was going to go. And I think this is right now. I like it more than The Fog. I really like The Fog, but I like it more than The Fog. Definitely like it more than The Thing. But John Carpenter, he's got some mastery to him. There's no doubt.
Yeah, so let's kind of talk about that a little bit. In '87, like I say, this is the first of a three-picture deal because he would go on to do In the Mouth of Madness and another film I'm forgetting off the top of my head. Oh, They Live. And I love They Live. I think it's incredible. There's some great stuff in it. And the thing, it's hard to feel like a part of it, but it's really of a paranoia kind of thing. And so I get the whole apocalyptic thing. And I know that Carpenter, when you watch him with interviews, he wants to make money. He wants to, that's what he does for a living, and I get it. And I understand it's hard work, and he did everything himself because he had to, and you know he has very strong opinions about what he thought some of his movies might be, and at the end of the day, he says, "Hey, I just tried to make a good movie," and I don't know how much of a bitter old man he is, or if he's better or not, especially with the crap that the Halloween franchise has turned into. And despite the schlockiness of the whole series, I actually like the first of these past three films a little bit, but the last one was just pure garbage, and I'm dreading reviewing the next one. But he gets paid, so he doesn't really give a rat's ass. But I've always felt drawn to his movies because the way they look, because the way they feel atmosphere wise. The Thing definitely gets that. It's just not a very pleasant one. It's not there's no happiness in it at all. Not that there isn't Halloween, but Halloween just as a kid, was I think the perfect Halloween movie. It's terrifying, literally, and scary, and it's just I don't know. He came along at the right time because like today, I don't. I mean, he'd still make a really good movie, but there was something about the way he shot his stuff and all that, that, growing up as a kid, I'd be like, well, this movie and that movie. Then later on you go, oh, it's all by the same guy. Or, hey, Kurt Russell was in a couple of them, or this actor or that actor. So it's pretty cool. And to me, he's one of the first guys that does it. And I keep mentioning a guy who's made some movies over the past 10 years. So Ty West, The House of the Devil, The Sacrament, a few others, Valley of Violence. He just did X. Pearl just came out. And he follows a similar pattern where, you've got an opening that introduces characters. It's got usually a great synth score to it, some music. It's got a sense of foreboding all the way through it. You see not what the evil is, because we don't really care. It means nothing. It's what it means is how it affects people and ultimately relationships. So even though in this movie we had a lot of superficial ones because there's so many side characters, it kind of devolved into the Western theme of like, hey, let's just put everything. Let's just close up all the windows and doors and let's make circle the wagons. Let's make our last stand kind of thing, and everybody kind of can relate to that. And Carpenter's a big Western guy, and Assault on Precinct 13, this movie, to me, are Westerns in a sense. Just like Vampires, his movie, that's a Western to me. It's not a vampire movie. It's a Western with vampires. And by this time, there's really no such thing as Westerns anymore, and hadn't been for a long time. But I agree with you. I think it looks good. I think it feels good. It's very atmospheric. You don't have to really, if you've watched it, you can always put it on the background, and it just feels like the fall, like it's the right time. I love the fog too. That's a good ghost story, I would say, is how I would call it. So I guess it just depends on what mood you're in. If I want a ghost story, I'm going with the fog and a theme, and the opening shots are great. The Thing, if I'm feeling really despondent, I'm gonna watch that because it's not a fun movie. I agree with you totally.
No.
And then there's this one, which is somewhat kind of in between, and it's like Lovecraft without the creatures, that sense of foreboding and the other world, and what you think of that can be scary and all
Uh,
that stuff too. Without
I
the
mean,
drugs too that he was on when he wrote it. No, seriously,
no, I get what you're saying with Lovecraft. A lot of his works, it is an almost illogical fear that's expanded upon. Um, but here it's really boiled down for us. It's made very real for the characters, and it's not it doesn't feel like a cosmic presence. And I think that's very important because they are looking through it through a theological lens. And with that, measuring the science, and they also have, oh, Jesus is an alien, by the way. You're throwing a lot of things at the wall. And you know what? I think it all pretty much sticks. And when it comes together, yeah, I think you got a really darn good film.
and he shot it in a month.
Yeah.
$1
No,
million budget. I mean, it made like 4 or 5 times its budget, so initial
that's
budget. So it was a minor hit. I mean, but it was one of those movies where people just kind of felt like, well, there should be something here in the third act, and it's like, no, it's just, that's where I think some people were let down. But again, as Carpenter gets older and his word's out there, a younger generation of people that go back to find these other types of films that don't exist now. They really like that. They Live's cool because you think of wrestling, you think of Roddy Piper, but to me, it's the glasses and some other stuff. It's just that Carpenter was the type of guy that would go kind of almost like David Lynch when you and I covered Twin Peaks, he would just kind of ad lib stuff on his own along the way, and a lot of times it worked. Maybe sometimes it didn't, and then things became things about it. And it's not like he forced everybody to think, okay, coffee is going to become a really super popular thing. But then when Twin Peaks coffee did, and now or whenever they would have coffee and donuts together in the station, when you and I covered all those
yeah,
episodes, it was just a thing. So when you see it in season 3 or 2, you're like, hell yeah, it's still there. It's cool. It's a thing. And that's the thing with Carpenter films too, is you kind of know what you're going to get, and there's nothing wrong with this template. I'm telling you, it
yeah,
works well every single time. Introduce the characters, give us a reason to at least follow them. Maybe we're introduced to them and we like them or we don't like them, but there's I guess exposed to relationships, because
yeah,
whatever's going to happen, that change agent, we're going to see how it reconciles, and that's really what comes down to. There's a conflict and there's the resolution. So yeah, good
yeah.
job, John. I like this film. I don't watch it all the time. I really don't. It's not as watchable as some other ones, but I do like it. It's not as watchable as The Fog, and both of them are probably not as The Thing's probably not as watchable as these past two. But you know, and the Mouth of Madness, which we did cover, I think, a year ago.
Yep.
On here. That's a fun one too. If you haven't seen that, it's got a little Lovecraftian thing to it. That's the third one in the apocalyptic series too, and it'll be interesting to see
That's
what we come
full
up with next.
Lovecraft. That's full Lovecraft.
Any other final thoughts?
Nope. Pretty much what we said. This is a really good film. If you haven't seen it, you should have. And if you have, well, maybe you need to watch it again. You don't know.
Yeah, Prince of Darkness, 1987, John Carpenter. Check it out here. It's going to be Slasher Sundays here, so we put out a list of movies last week, RDV and I, of potential ones from the 80s, but also some classic ones too. And I know you've got a list of some, so we'll be doing a few odds and ends ones over the next couple weeks and fitting that stuff in too. So it'll be interesting to see what we come up with too. We might do Italian, we might do German, we might do French, we might do erotic lesbian vampires, we might do Australian slashers with Jamie Lee Curtis. There's so much to pick from. That's the beauty of being here in the fall in October, because we got all these fun things to talk about, which gives us an excuse, as always, to talk about John Carpenter films, which I absolutely love. They're fun. What can I say? Next week, a decision has been made, Princess. It's we're gonna, after Red Sonja tonight in the back room, gonna discuss what feedback we've gotten on our different channels and see which short ones are going to be in a consensus. We did a video last week that I put some titles in there. If you look at them, there's some Argento films and all that. We're going to be picking from probably one of those. So I think we had like The Howling. Was it the Sleepaway Camp? Not Sleepaway Camp, the Babysitter Slasher one or whatever. Cheerleader Camp. That's it. Excuse me. Different ones. There's a whole bunch. So Pixel, you need to take a look at that too. Okay. All right, guys. Thanks for watching, showing up tonight. That's always appreciated. Obviously, getting the word out about us is appreciated too. We definitely do take subscriptions, or I should say suggestions and all that too, for films and all that. It's a fun month, so absolutely we want to make sure that as we're getting close to 1,000, that you guys are dialing in and enjoying the films that we talk about. And what better time to talk about extreme films than Halloween? When we get to Thanksgiving and Christmas, it's a different story, but we try to have fun. I'm looking at you, Dan Haggerty, and that scary movie called Elves. But until then, guys, have a good night, enjoy, and as always, stay extreme. So Red Sonja is at 7 tonight. Yes, that'll be on a different stream. That's already posted on the channel. If you take a look there, it'll be reposted here soon. Thanks, guys. Have a good night.
So long.